SQL Server 2012, Administration and Programming, Database Design, Date, DateTime, and other temporal data types. Before we start considering the data types, let's consider an exciting new feature of 2012 is the format, which is a new function and takes the place of convert, at least in some applications. So let's see how it works. Let's just run it again. So we see that MM is capitalized. It looks kind of strange, but actually we need, otherwise it doesn't work correctly. And this gives only the date only without the time. DateTime to new data type was added with SQL Server 2008, and it supports year from year 1 to year 9999. Date time starts with 1753. Let's run a little script. A script is a sequence of statements, and I can run it as a batch by highlighting it and executing it. And this is date time. And as we can see with date time 2, we can go back to, well, actually, we can go back 2000 years. And the data length of date time 2 is 8 bytes. Date time is internal representation, date time 2 also. It doesn't look like this internally. Actually, how it looks internally is 4 bytes is the days, the day offset, and another 4 bytes is the fraction of a second count from midnight. So whenever we see various date and date time representations, these are string representations. Internally, it does not look like this. Internally, in fact, would be very hard for us to comprehend it. This is how it looks internally. So the first 4 bytes, this is hex number. Up to this point, that's the day offset, actually from 1900. And this is the count. It counts fraction of a second, not exactly milliseconds, from midnight to figure out the time part. The fraction of a millisecond, fraction of a second is actually 3.33 milliseconds, which is a clock tick. So we cannot get accuracy down to a millisecond with date time representation. Date internal representation is 3 bytes, is actually the count of days from the start date, which is year 0. Date and time data types are new to SQL Server 2008. Let's see how we can use it designing a table. This is pretty typical. It's a surrogate primary key, int, identity, or identity integer, primary key, ticker symbol exchange, quantity is integer, price is money, and the date is date only type, no time, and we get a default from get date, and time is also, we get the default from get date, it's time only. So let's run this script. We have 1 rows inserted, and we have 2 more and a select. And this is the result. We inserted 2 rows into the table, and this is the date, and this is the time of insertion. DateTime Offset combines time of the day that has time zone awareness and based on 24-hour clock. For example, this is the offset. Let's work with it. This is the first script, and we see the DateTime Offset as 12 hours and 15 minutes. Let's run the next script, and here we see the DateTime Offset as 5 hours. And in this, the DateTime Offset is -5. There is a function, a system function, system DateTime Offset, and that is -4. If we compare get date with get UTC date, which is a universal time, date, coordinated, C stands for, then we'll see the difference is 4. So this is what we see in the system time offset, and this is related to a server. This is not related to a database or SQL server itself, but a physical server, the computer SQL server is operating on. So we can see the -4 is 16 minus 20 is -4. Let's run the next script. Well, we can see the increased accuracy. In this instance, the seconds, fraction of seconds goes out to 7 decimals. Let's proceed to the next script, which has a number of system functions. Some of them we already checked out. And we can see the different representations. If we look in the human resources employee table, we can see that the data type is being used there, for example, hire date or birth date, because we don't care about the time in this instance, so we are not using date time and saving 5 bytes, in fact. Let's run the following script. So this is date and this is time, and we combined it to date time. The following script also combines date and times into DateTime. Let's run the entire script again, and here is the result. SQL Server 2012 has two exciting functions, date from parts and DateTime from parts as well, which makes it quite simple to get date or DateTime from the parts. Prior to SQL Server 2012, it was a bit difficult to get the combination going. Let's check it out, and we see it's indeed very fast and very simple. We can use DateTime to from parts to actually assemble the time part, in this case 23, that's the hour, and this is minute and seconds. Let's do a little cleanup and recap. We have got an introduction into DateTime, and other temporal data types. The most important thing to remember is that there is a singular internal representation for each data type, which we can print out usually as hex value, and we can look at it, but actually we don't understand just by looking at it what date or what time is it. To make the internal representation readable, we have to do convert, or we have to do format. So the internal format, which is basically integer storage, converted to string representation. And there is a big confusion about it. Some people think it's the string representation how we see it in Management Studio. No, that's not the internal representation. That's the string representation how the programmers who programmed Management Studio decided to display it. We can display date and time many ways. We can display it in many languages. But there is still only one singular internal representation which is accurate. We may make mistakes as we are doing conversions, vice versa. If we are converting a string to internal representation DateTime, we may make mistakes. But that is the challenge with dates and DateTime. There are so many variations, and we have to be aware that the string representation has nothing to do with the internal binary representation. This is the end of the unit.